Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Phil Arno. Often here on The Big Picture, I talk about my experiences when I was out in Los Angeles for 20 years. While I was out there, I spent quite a lot of time writing scripts and hanging on to the excitement of the Hollywood entertainment industry. One of the first things that you learn when you want to be a writer is that if you want to keep the interest of your audience, you have to offer conflict. Every story, every entertaining situation revolves around conflict. A good guy, a bad guy. Of course, you're always supposed to root for that good guy, right? Well, normally that rule is supposed to apply to fiction. Journalism, in contrast, is supposed to play by a different set of rules. The media is not supposed to be there to entertain you, but to inform you. They're supposed to be able to leave their bias at home. Maybe they include the drama, but they're not supposed to pick the good guys and the bad guys. That's for you to decide. They're supposed to just tell you what's happening, plain and simple. And you, the informed public, can be the judge. You can decide what makes sense and what doesn't. Well, as most of us kind of know, it seems that today's so-called news media has, in effect, to command your attention and achieve an agenda, change the rules of the game. Just look at MSNBC and CNN. In print, look at the New York Times and the Washington Post. These so-called news outlets have become so biased in their coverage that it's downright laughable. The examples are constant and nothing new. One example, during the 2016 campaign for president, there was a big story about several women coming forward to accuse Trump of sexual assault. At the very same time, a story surfaced about a WikiLeaks release of Clinton campaign manager John Podesta's emails. They contained slurs and derogatory comments by senior Clinton campaign officials about Catholics, Latinos, and blacks, and outright confirmation of media collusion with the Clinton campaign. Now, the coverage, the night these stories broke, ABC, NBC, and CBS ran a combined 23 minutes of coverage of the Trump story. The Clinton story, 1 minute and 7 seconds. A ratio of negative coverage of Trump versus Clinton, 23-1. In print, it was no better. The New York Times had 11 negative stories on Trump, including one in the sports section, but 0 on the Clinton WikiLeaks story, 11-0. In Trump's first 100 days in office, CNN and NBC ran 93 negative stories out of every 100 stories for Trump. 93% negative. CBS was better, 91% negative. The New York Times was great, only 83% negatives. Now, you might say, well, what about Fox News? Right, they are the exception. But many of the personalities on Fox openly explain that they're commentators, not journalists, they're opinion people. For the record, Fox coverage during that first 100 days, 52% negative on Trump, 48% positive. Fair and balanced? Maybe. Here with me today is a man who is no stranger to the news media of today and the way things get covered. Congressman Chris Collins has served Western New York in public office for over 12 years, first as Erie County Executive, and now as our representative for the 27th Congressional District. Welcome to the show, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you here, and there's a lot to talk about. Let's first handle something that came out a little bit recently, and that's Chris Jacobs announcing that he'll be running for the same seat.
Well, first of all, this will lead into your intro.
Right, okay.
What we will refer to as the fake news.
Right.
And since we're in the Buffalo market, the leader of the pack in fake news is the Buffalo News. And so it was amazing that when I ran last year, I didn't run against Nate McMurray. I ran against the Buffalo News. And probably the worst of the worst is a fellow named Jerry Zaremski. Jerry Zaremski pretends to be a reporter, but he's a columnist, in fact. And every story he writes, even one last week, two last week, I mean, again and again. My stories are on the front page, and the bias is just pouring forth. You know, twisted, just enough truth in it that he can say some things. But that is the media today. So let's talk about Chris Jacobs, who just jumped in. You have to know the Jacobs family, and Chris Jacobs would be a favorite of the Buffalo News. Very, very liberal editorials we see. And in fact, Chris Jacobs is a Democrat wearing a Republican sport coat. So just recently, they did a story called PolitiFact, where I have accurately referred to Chris Jacobs as a never-Trumper. Now, what is a never-Trumper? A never-Trumper doesn't mean that person has condemned Trump. It doesn't mean a never-Trumper is calling for his impeachment, like Nate McMurray is. But a never-Trumper is someone who's never supported Trump, and that is Chris Jacobs. So PolitiFact decided they would define a never-Trumper as someone who's calling for Trump's impeachment and called him out during the 2016 election cycle. So interestingly, they decided to have a definition, a Webster's definition, which is not accurate, and then wrote a story about it that said my claims that Jacobs was a never-Trumper were plain out false. So let's look at the facts. Donald Trump ran in 2016. Chris Jacobs never said a positive thing about Trump. We had a big rally here in Western New York at the KeyBank Center. Chris Jacobs was not there. We then had the Republican convention close by in Cleveland, where I seconded Donald Trump's nomination to be president of the United States.
And you were the first one actually to come out and endorse
And I was the first member of Congress. Chris Jacobs was not at the convention. Chris Jacobs had said at the time, I'm running for state senate, I'm not going to get involved in presidential debates. But he's pretending to be a Republican, again, Democrat really, wearing a Republican sport coat. But you know what was interesting? Bill Weld, who ran against Trump on the libertarian line, Chris Jacobs praised him several times. So he's saying he didn't want to enter the presidential, but he praised Bill Weld. And why did he do that? Because he was Bill Weld's lieutenant governor candidate when Bill Weld was looking to run for governor of New York. Ultimately, John Faso got the nod. So Chris Jacobs is too cute by half, trying to pretend now that he's not anti-Trump. Well, let's just call it out for what it is. He's certainly not pro-Trump. He's been a never-Trumper, never yet has said a positive thing about Trump. And so I contrast that every day. First, I'm the first member of Congress to support Donald Trump. I was chosen to second his nomination at the convention. And it was interesting, someone did a story recently on the voting record of members of Congress. It turns out of 435 members of Congress, I have the #1 voting record in support of the president. And it was just last week that the Buffalo News, I'm not sure what point they were trying to make, but they said on the potential threat of tariffs on Mexico if they didn't help stem the flow of Central Americans, flooding across the caravans, that he would impose tariffs. And they did point out I was the only member locally to support the president. And guess what? He got it done. He got it done. So in a way, I said they were trying to bash me in the Buffalo News. But in fact, they did me a favor. They reminded everyone that I've been with Trump since February of 16. That's 3.5 years. #1 voting record, have been with him because there's no president who has accomplished more for this country. The lowest unemployment in history, the highest employment among blacks in history, the highest employment for Hispanics. We have the high, the stock market. And I can go, and in many of these cases, I've been standing at the president's side as we've accomplished things, like the tax reform.
Yeah, there seems to be a very big contrast to what's happened in the last 2 years to what went on before.
Well, the irony of ironies is Joe Biden's trying to say, President Obama set the stage for the great economy. He's admitting we have a great economy, And in some convoluted way, because under 8 years of Obama, the economy was awful, unemployment was high, the number of people on food stamps was at a high point. Now, 5 million people are no longer on food stamps because they're working. So again, it's not being reported accurately,
This
which
is
goes
all,
back to
this is
your
all
opening
related
statement.
because the message, whether it's coming from a politician or from the news media, it's something that gets twisted. In the example that you just gave, they're trying to take credit for the 8 years that Obama was in office. Now, I lived through those 8 years,
yeah, we all did.
And we all heard Obama personally get up there with a microphone and say, jobs are not going to come back. The manufacturing jobs are gone. We can't expect that to happen. And he said, I don't know how Trump is going to, he's promising to bring this back and to raise the economy and the GDP, that's, what kind of magic wand is he going to have to fix all those things? He's just not going to do it. And you can Google that, you can get it on YouTube. He actually said those things. Now, it's almost like that didn't happen.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, no, well, we knew this was going to happen because we set it up and we started it. Now, but the message that you hear when you listen to Biden or when you listen to Obama or when you listen to the news media is, oh yeah, it didn't happen under Trump, and this last 2 years was actually just a continuation of all the good things that happened under Obama. I'm confused.
Well, let's go back to the tax bill that we passed, and I was certainly part of that early on. That has really is the foundation of the economy we have today. We cut the corporate rate, which was the highest in the world at 35%, down to 21%. So corporations now have more money to return to shareholders. They have more money to invest, and better yet, we said if you make an investment, you can take the deduction for the investment, the capital. You can deduct it all in the year you spend the money, which gives them a deduction, which lowers their tax burden, which lets them spend more, and it's this kind of engine. And so when you look at, whether it's a Brian Higgins or any of the other Democrats that not only fought against our tax reform, but continue to fight and say it's a disaster. Well, in Western New York, I had someone stop me today. I had to go to the bank. And they said, can you explain to me the SALT deduction that the governor keeps railing on? New Yorkers can no longer take the full deduction for their property taxes. It's capped at $10,000. And I said, well, here's what they forget. We doubled the exemption, standard exemption, to $24,000. And in my district, the 27th, we had probably 1% or 2% of the individuals that were itemizing with more than 24,000. Well, so I said between the lower corporate rates, and if you're a small business owner, we put in something called the qualified business income deduction of 20%. So you knock down your taxes for both state and federal by 20%. This is an engine, is the foundation for everything positive. And our governor, who rails on what he calls the SALT deduction or the limitation on it, is ignoring the fact we're the highest taxed, most regulated, least business-friendly state in the nation. We're losing population every day. Contrast that to Florida, which is gaining 1,500 people a day. And as a result, we'll now have fewer members of Congress than Florida. When we had 45, they had 7. We're now going to have 25, and they're going to have 29. But their budget in Florida is $70 billion a year. And they have more people than us. Ours is $170 billion. You can't even understand the foundation. $170 billion versus 70 or 80, they have more people than we do. And I think, Governor, the reason people are leaving has nothing to do with the SALT deduction.
Or the weather.
Or the weather. Oh, yeah, that was the ultimate insult. It's the weather. But it goes back to, I'm proud to support our president. I'm proud to have been a big part of the passage of the tax reform that's now the engine that continues to chug along. So when someone like, back to Chris Jacobs, who had the audacity to say, I'm running against Congressman Collins because he's not effective. Let's talk about that for a second. Here's an individual who was in the state Senate in the majority, who has never sponsored a bill signed into law. So he knows what it's like to be ineffective. He, well, I'll also throw Brian Higgins in, are the definition of ineffective. And if you contrast that, I like to say in the last month, I've accomplished more than Brian Higgins has accomplished in 14 years. Here's another one. Brian Higgins in 14 years never sponsored a bill signed into law other than a post office. So when they say I'm ineffective, let's just look at the last month. When President Trump asked me to come up with recommendations for some key positions, U.S. Attorney, federal judge, U.S. Marshal, and the International Joint Water Commission. I went to work. I found 3 very qualified people for what they call the IJC. Got Jane Corwin nominated to be chair. She's confirmed. A great individual out of North Dakota and another one out of Michigan. They've been confirmed. John Sinatra to be our next federal judge has been nominated and should be confirmed very shortly. Pete Vito to be U.S. Marshal has been nominated. We expect to get that over the finish line here shortly. And J.P. Kennedy, who's the acting U.S. Attorney. I was front and center on all 4 of those, which have all moved forward. Some last year, but mostly this year. So when someone says I'm ineffective, when you look at an impact in Western New York, there's never been, ever, a member of Congress with that clout. Why? Because President Trump knows who's been with him since the beginning, and it is me. So even to this day, where the families of Flight 3407 were desperate to meet with Secretary Chow to talk about the flight hours for the pilot and co-pilot, the database so that we don't have a pilot that was frankly incompetent as the one that crashed Flight 3407. I was able to put together a meeting for the families just 6 or 8 weeks ago with the Secretary of Transportation and the acting director of the FAA, where they confirmed they're not going to change the pilot hours, and they are going to prioritize the database. Those are accomplishments, and I would flip that around. Not that I'm totally, but I am doing the comparison, because when you look at it, the Buffalo News' favorite member of Congress is Brian Higgins, who, as I've said, has never in 14 years sponsored a bill other than a post office signed into law. And he has 0 clout in the administration, clearly, but he also didn't have any clout back when Obama was in. So I will answer these very directly, as I am right now. These are facts. This is not fake news. No one can say otherwise, but they won't report it. And they won't report it because it doesn't fit the narrative, especially of the Buffalo News, who was my opponent in 2018. And you know what? I won. So as far as the Buffalo News goes, keep it coming. Keep it coming.
The tough thing today is to run on issues, because so often, and you see this with Trump, and that's part of what my intro was all about. So often the message is all about character and vilifying people, as opposed to talking about what's good for the country, the issues that we all have to be influenced under. I mean, we have to live under the taxes, and we have to live under the infrastructure, and the things that you guys decide in Washington that have a real effect on our everyday life. And it really has nothing to do with personal lives of the people involved, but the message that we all hear every day in the press, and the message that politicians often talk about is not issues. It's the character.
Well, and you know, Phil, when there are issues like the disaster on the southern border, it is beyond comprehension what's going on there. It is a humanitarian crisis. It is a national security crisis. And the very same Democrats who supported President Obama when he said we need to secure the borders, we need a wall, we need to know who's coming in, the hypocrisy of those Democrats who now are saying we have no crisis on the border. The public knows better, and every nation secures their borders. You need to know who's coming in. We let in over 1 million immigrants per year with a legal process, the most liberal there is anywhere in the world. we'd like to change some of that and be more focused on the skills of people coming in. Today we don't, but over 1 million people come in legally, and our Democrats are supporting those who are jumping the line, crawling over the fence. And what's even worse, Phil, if they come from Mexico and they're apprehended, we can return them to Mexico. And the loophole that so few people understand is if they're from Central America, our law does not allow us to return them to Central America. So the current caravans are coming out of Central America. They were, but now it'll be stopped. Mexico was aiding and abetting, so Trump did the right thing in getting them to step up to that. But we need to change the law in Congress, a very simple change to say if we apprehend an illegal sneaking into our country, we can return them to the country that they came from. But we can't, so that's why you're seeing the Central Americans, and when they touch the ground in the US, we can't return them. And we said, well, give us more detention beds so we can at least hold them. Well, the Democrats won't give Trump the money, even for kids, to have beds to sleep in, so they have to be released. And we say, all right, 3 years from now when you have a court hearing, I hope you show up. Well, you and I both know they won't. These are the kind of things that the Democrats today, especially with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, they are blocking good common sense proposals. You ask the average American, if we apprehend a Mexican and we can return them to Mexico, why can't we, if we apprehend someone from Guatemala or Honduras, why can't we return them there? Because that's the loophole. There's another loophole called amnesty. If someone seeks amnesty, you have to at least process that. But the requirements are, if someone's coming out of Central America seeking amnesty because they're persecuted in their country, they are required to request amnesty in the first border they pass, which would be Mexico. They should be,
right.
I'm seeking amnesty, I'm now in Mexico. Well, then go to the Mexican government, ask permission to stay in Mexico because you're being persecuted and you're seeking amnesty. But no, they don't want to stay in Mexico. They're ignoring that portion of the law. They're seeking amnesty in the United States, but they've already crossed through another country that could give them safe haven. But these are 5 and 6 levels down. The average American, they're busy in their own life. They don't have time to deep dive these issues, and the news is not reporting it.
That's the key, especially on TV and the news media, the electronic news media. These things are not simple explanations. They're not a 30-second soundbite.
They're not.
And if you hear somebody attacking character, for instance, as we talked about before, and not talking about issues, that's a warning sign. Because if they don't want to address issues, that either means they don't have a good position on issues, or the issues are too complicated to explain and they just don't want to get involved with talking to the people about it. The electronic media just won't give you enough time normally to talk about things. When it's complicated and it needs an explanation, that means you have to have the time and the message just doesn't get out.
Sometimes the sound bite is 10 seconds and the explanation is 2 or 3 minutes.
Right.
And that's where we are in America today. I give the Democrats credit. They are very good on the sound bites. Here was a good example.
I was just going to say that, yes.
So the Violence Against Women's Act, which is a piece of legislation that needs to be reauthorized every, I don't know, it's 3 to 5 years, I don't know exactly. The reauthorization is now, and it's always been bipartisan. It's not a D or an R issue until Pelosi became Speaker. So what did she do? She put gun control into the Violence Against Women's Act. She did that to drive away those of us who support the Second Amendment, wanting us to vote no so they can run a commercial next year saying, Congressman Collins voted against the Violence Against Women reauthorization. Well, what I voted against was the Second Amendment attack, where she's politicizing.
But that needs an explanation.
There you go. This just happened a week or two ago.
As a matter of fact, very coincidentally, last night in preparation for the show, I was looking at the votes for the past couple of weeks, and I saw that. And I saw you voting yes, and then this is all in one day. It came up and it was yes, and it didn't pass, and then the next vote was no. You voted no, and it did pass, and there was all these votes one after, it was the same bill, supposedly, because it was listed as the same bill, but there were little addendums to it. And it came up for vote like 3, 4, 5 times. And I was going to ask you about, well, what was the difference? You were voting on the same bill over and over and over again.
Because, all right, I'll give you another good example. Representative Omar has condemned Israel on the House floor. And she was attacked by everyone that was anti-Semitic. And normally you would call that out. Nancy Pelosi knew she had to do something. So they put forth the bill, deliberately didn't name Representative Omar by name because she's a Democrat, but it was an anti-Semitism vote, that we would condemn anyone that was anti-Semitic. And I was a yes. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was a strong yes. By 3:30, they had watered it down. It was an anti-everything. Anti-bias of anything. Bias against women, bias against blacks, bias against Boy Scouts, bias against Jews. So watered down that I was one of only 6 Republicans that voted against the anti-bias bill. And everyone's saying, well, how can you vote against it? And I said, because it was so watered down. And in particular, it was about Representative Omar attacking Israel and Jews, and it had nothing supporting them. And I said, we should have had in that resolution a strong support for the only democracy in the Middle East, our ally, Israel. It was not there. I voted against it. And then the good news is, since there were only 6 Republicans that did, only 6 members, they asked us all why, and I was very clear. It was because it didn't go far enough in supporting Israel, and it was a get out of jail free for Representative Omar. She wasn't named. It became just it became a nothing burger, and I voted against it. But that's another case of Speaker Pelosi in not serving America at all, but pandering to her own members, and in doing so, it's an insult, certainly an insult to Israel. And now we have Representative Omar saying, I don't dislike Jews, I just hate where they live. I hate Israel, because she hasn't backed off of that. I hate Israel, but I don't hate Jews. I mean, really, I think we need to call that out for what it is. Pelosi refused to do it. That's the life in D.C. today. It is so politicized.
It's interesting, the division that I mean, many people think that the country is as divided now as it's ever been since maybe the Civil War. I'm not sure, because I know that the country was quite divided back in the late 1800s and maybe in the 1930s when Roosevelt was moving the country way to the left, and there were a lot of conflicts throughout the history of the country. Even when we first began in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there were a lot of differences that were almost violent at times. Are we that divided, and is it because it's a power struggle, or is it because the issues are there?
No, it's because of Trump. The political divide was Trump. They did not expect Trump to win at all.
It's Republicans as well as Democrats that have a problem with Trump to a degree, right? I'll rephrase that. Establishment people.
Well, there are a few. Mitt Romney is no friend of Trump. We actually have a Republican member who's never been a good Republican member, Amash, who's now called for Trump's impeachment. And the press is all over that. Republicans calling for Trump's impeachment. Though this is a member who has never voted for anything. I think he voted against Jack Nicklaus getting the Congressional Gold Medal. And I really, truly believe that because he said it cost money. And so, no, the Republicans are solidly behind the Trump policies that have all moved this country forward to where we're the most robust economy anywhere in the world. And a few of the establishment types, those who are trying to play both ends against the middle. But if you hear, people like Senator Graham, myself, and others, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. The positive direction of our country is Trump. He got elected. The Democrats hated it. They've been on this campaign since 30 seconds after the results came in. It's not going to stop. It's going to continue until next November. And we're going to have to understand that Congress will get nothing done because the speaker, the speaker that Brian Higgins said, I'll never vote for Nancy Pelosi. Guess what? He did. Somebody asked me about it, and I said, well, I knew he would. Liar, liar, pants on fire. It's that, but does the Buffalo News report that accurately? No, they don't, but wouldn't expect them to. But with Pelosi as speaker, she is one vindictive individual. One of the members, very, very middle of the road, moderate, said she would never vote against Pelosi. She didn't vote against Pelosi. Pelosi's first move was to strip her of her committee assignment. And people like Brian Higgins were afraid if he voted no and she won, he wouldn't be on Ways and Means. So in looking out for his own best interests, even though he had pledged he would not, he voted for her, and sure enough, he's still on Ways and Means, getting nothing done, but that's neither here nor there. But we're stuck there, Phil, now until the next election. Another good example is we're going back this week to start working on appropriation bills. That's what funds the government. It turns out Nancy Pelosi didn't put a budget forward this year. Have you seen that in the newspaper and the media? No. They didn't even bring one forward to vote on. When we were in charge, we went to the Democrats and said, what do we got to do to have your support on the spending caps? Because the big divide is military versus social programs. We worked it out for the first time ever. We had a 2-year agreement on what they call the budget cap. So when the appropriators closed the door and said, how are we going to allocate the monies, between different cancer research and different kinds of things, they knew the top line number. Well, Pelosi did not come to us this time, and so she deemed a number. So we're going to enter appropriations this week, next week, and the following week on appropriation bills where there's no agreement on the caps. She gutted defense, added all this money to the social programs. So every bill, including the defense bill, which was always all but unanimous, are going to come forward with no Republican votes, which means they are dead on arrival in the Senate, that we control the Senate, Republicans. So these messaging bills, which is what you'll now have to call it, are not going to see the light of day in the Senate because there's no agreement on these budget caps where the Republicans had a 2-year agreement. Again, you don't see that in the newspaper. And so we're going to hit September 30th where we have to have a something in place. It could be a continuing resolution just to kick the can down the street, but we're going to have no agreement heading into that time frame, which puts the threat of another government shutdown front and center. And it's not because Republicans don't want to negotiate. We did it over the last 2 years. We wanted more for defense. She wanted more for social programs. We worked it out. That's what compromise is. And we got things done. Well, this year, nothing's getting done. And worse than that, we're going to head into September. The threat of a shutdown. Don't you know, I'm hopeful that if worse comes to worse, we at least kick the can, with what they call a continuing resolution. But if worse came to worse, who would be blamed?
Well,
Trump.
yeah, the message is going to be, yes.
So I don't know where it's headed other than these next few weeks, we're going to be wasting our efforts in Congress. The appropriations bills will pass with the Democrats in control of the House, truly party line votes, and they're going to go nowhere in the Senate. And we are in a bad place because Nancy Pelosi is aiding and abetting in the 2020 presidential election and trying not to make America better, but instead to set the stage for Trump to be defeated in November of 2020. But it's been going on since 30 seconds after he was pronounced the winner of the election in 2016.
Well, in the interest of time, let's have a brief discussion of a couple of different subjects. Tariffs. Trump is a business guy, and he kind of wheels and deals, and he negotiates, and he's been made out to sound like he's mistreating our friends and neighbors, our allies, and playing hardball with China and North Korea and with Mexico just recently. But in the long run, economically, they have been taking advantage of us. We've been losing.
Forever.
And so kind of from a business standpoint, which is what it is, it makes sense. I mean, what he's doing makes sense.
Well, if Trump was playing poker, he's holding 4 aces. And the thing is, our country we have a huge trade deficit when it comes to exports versus imports. Our deficit is about $800 billion a year of goods and services that come into our country more than what leave our country to go to these other places. A country is not secure unless you have an economy. I mean, you look at North Korea, Venezuela, they have no economy. Their people are living in abject poverty, and. It's the economic engine that gets politicians elected or not, whether you're in Great Britain or in other democracies. So Trump knows that he's got the upper hand. And these countries have been cheating and taking advantage of us for decades. There's never been a president willing to stand up because it is noisy. It could be in the short run unintended consequences. Typically, if we put in tariffs, the retaliation is against our farmers, whether it's soybeans or whether it's cheese or whether it's pork. In the case of one thing now, it's even Kentucky bourbon. So Trump has come up now with, just like we have aid for hurricanes and forest fires, there's going to be aid for farmers. Because we know they are the unintended consequence of other countries retaliating, as Trump's simply saying, we want a fair trade, not free trade isn't free when the other side cheats. And so, recently with Mexico, he threatened tariffs if they didn't help stem the tide of the Central Americans, and it worked. He's in the same negotiation stance with Canada and Mexico and what was NAFTA, and he's come up with the USMCA, which is better for our dairy workers and others. And Pelosi's blocking it from coming to a vote. Can you believe that?
Well, in many ways, some of the policies that he's proposing and trying to put into action, I kind of get the feeling that countries are observing the division that we have and thinking, well, you know what, if we kind of wait and don't play the game, if we just kind of sit back and try and hold out long enough, maybe Trump will lose his power and we'll win. We'll go back to the way it was.
That's where at least we have a year and a half before the election. Trump's going to win, but we have a year and a half, and for some of these economies like Mexico and even Europe right now, where they cheat as well. I mean, when we send an automobile to Europe, there's a 10% tariff. When Europe sends an automobile to us, there is no tariff. I mean, China, I mean, you can just go on intellectual property and the like. A year and a half is a long time. Trump is, I mean, right now, we're already there's list 1 through 4. We're on list 3 with China with 25% tariffs now. List 4, you'd really feel that list 4, which might come this fall, would be everything you're buying at Walmart. Completed products coming over. Right now, the tariff is on the components and raw materials. And he's got the attention of China. They have a huge trade surplus coming out of their country to ours. Their economy is not where it used to be. And so I do believe, we will see a deal with China this year. I'm hoping by September. This is my opinion, because China needs a deal. I think they misunderstood some comments that Trump made about the Federal Reserve. They thought, oh, maybe the U.S. economy's in trouble. We can wait them out.
Right.
And. But right now, these tariffs are hurting China. And yes, there's some unintended consequences through some of our industries, which there is a process where a company can ask for an exclusion on certain things. Right now, it's kind of backed up. But Trump's taking on an issue that is our future. We need the manufacturing jobs back. We need to have a level playing field, whether it's automobiles going to Europe. We have to protect our intellectual property and access to markets that we don't have in China. But no president before Trump has ever taken this on, because it is...
Well, it's tough.
It's noisy.
It can be painful.
It's unintended consequences on soybeans and on bourbon and on cheese. And hence, other countries have said most presidents never had the backbone to take these things on.
Well,
Trump is.
It's an uncomfortable thing because in the long run, it's a winning position because it encourages fairness, okay? The other countries have been taking advantage of us, boosting their economy, okay, by the trade, imbalance. But if we want to remedy that, it's like taking the Band-Aid and ripping it off. There's a little bit of pain there because tariffs can, in the short term, raise prices for Americans.
Correct.
And that's the big pain. Okay, but if we can get through that, and
we will.
And they learn that this is not, see, the message that I'm afraid of is if these other countries don't understand that Trump's position is not going away, then they may be thinking, well, if, again, like I said, if we just wait it out, Trump will be, quote unquote, overthrown in his own country and we'll go back to the way it was.
NAFTA done, USMCA, why Pelosi won't bring it to a vote, I think we know why. The threat of more tariffs if Mexico didn't help stop the stem of Central Americans. They know Trump's not bluffing. China knows Trump's not bluffing. They've never seen anything like this. I'm not sure that they don't know exactly how to deal with it. But we're saying to them, we want to trade with you, but we need you to stop stealing our intellectual property. You need to give us access to your markets like we give you access. It's going to continue to be noisy. I mean, I pretty much expected the thing with Mexico to be done quickly, and it was. It's going to take a little more time with China. They play a longer.
Lose if
they play a longer game, but I do think we'll see it certainly this year, and I'm hopeful by the end of September.
All right. How about socialism? This move towards socialism by the Democrats. How can they think that that's a winning formula in this country? I mean, I know that, I mean, the government education system, maybe people don't know what socialism is, the younger people.
Right.
But the vast majority of people who have any sense of history, they know
so
what socialism
what we
is.
have going on is a primary. You know, we had this with Trump and all the folks that were on the stage. Well, now there's 24 or more Democrats that want to be the candidate, and there can only be one. The voters who turn out in primaries, Republican primaries tend to be more conservative. Democrat primaries, more liberal / socialism / all those other things, Green New Deal, etc. So that's why you're seeing these presidential candidates running left. That's not where America is, because whether it's Green New Deal or shutting down all of our power plants, or whether it's just embracing socialism, or even worse yet, you know, what they're talking about with a complete government takeover of health care. You know, all you have to do is look at all the Canadians coming down here every day to get health care they can't get in Canada that has their free health care. Forget about the $30+ trillion that government-run health care would cost us. They're doing it to get the support. You know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, she's got a couple of million Twitter followers who are very far left, progressive, socialists. You know, she's the one that chased Amazon out of New York City. And guess what? They left, and they're not here. How'd that work out? But it all comes down to presidential politics.
Well, isn't that a difficult position then for the Democrat Party? Because when
Yes,
you're running that far left, once they win the primary, how do they come back?
Well, and that's why I'm 100% confident Trump's going to be reelected because of that. You know, whoever runs against me, and certainly Nate McMurray has said he will, he's calling for Trump's impeachment. He's always supported complete government takeover of health care. You know, he got an F rating on his Second Amendment from the NRA, and he supports the Green New Deal. These policies are not average Americans, certainly not Western New Yorkers, hardworking Western New Yorkers, perhaps Democrats that were raised in a union household who had some beliefs, who are now saying, I'm not a socialist. I don't want the government taking away my private insurance. I've got pretty good health and care from my employer. They would take it away. You know, I enjoy having my Second Amendment rights. They want to take those away. The Democrats are moving so far left. That's why I'm confident the Republicans will retake the House next year. Trump will remain president. You know, we see what he's done with the Supreme Court and other judges, very conservative, going back to the Constitution, the rule of law. And the public will see this as the debates occur, especially the Democrats, who are going to attack each other, pushing that party left, and further left. That's not America today. And so, you know, I have folks coming up to me all the time. they seem inclined to say, I'm a Democrat, as in a registered Democrat. I support you, I support the president, I can't stand Cuomo, I can't stand Pelosi, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, then your values, American values, the land of opportunity, the Constitution, which is not where the Democrats are today, it's indefensible. And so I think the Republicans are finally going to have their day. I mean, even go back to now, and you can't help but talk about what we have in New York State, which is partial birth murder. New York State now, a baby can be born alive and murdered. Murdered. It's a living human being because they botched the abortion, if you will. So it's partial birth murder in both Virginia and New York. And the irony of ironies, Phil, is last week they signed into law that you can't declaw your cat because it's inhuman. How can, think about the Democrats who are killing living babies, but say we're really worried about it not being proper to declaw a cat. You can't make this up. If this was a movie, you'd say, no, this can't be real. But this is New York today. This is much of the Democrat Party. They don't want to talk about it. We have two bills on the House we're trying to get on the House floor. One of them is a born alive bill. It simply states if a baby is born and is alive, its life will be protected. I believe 98% of Americans agree with that. Nancy Pelosi won't let that vote come to a vote. She's blocking it.
Why can't the Republicans get these messages out one way or another? I mean, I know the media is not going to be real cooperative in promoting the Republicans.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a way, because
this is not, killing babies is not a Republican versus Democrat.
I mean, the people that I talk to, even the people who say Trump is a terrible person and the Republicans are mean and they're going to have us eating dog food or whatever, they hear the message, but when you talk to them about issues, they're in agreement. Killing babies is not a good thing. We want to give somebody an education so that they can earn a living rather than pay them
So our
welfare.
bill right now, the Born Alive bill, I think would pass our House with an overwhelmingly strong number. But Pelosi's blocking it. So we have something called a discharge petition sitting on the desk now. We need 18 Democrats to sign that petition, which will bring it to a vote. Brian Higgins and Joe Morelli and the others, they won't sign the petition. The other petition that we have on the Speaker's desk, they don't want to talk about, is the anti-BDS relative to Israel. There's a worldwide movement of folks that hate Israel, like Representative Omar, who want to shut down their economy. And so they call it the BDS movement, which is an anti-economic for Israel. We are wanting to condemn that with an anti-BDS bill, resolution of Congress condemning it. Pelosi's sitting on that as well. And so again, I would call on these folks who claim to support the Jewish state, Joe Morelli in Rochester, Brian Higgins in Buffalo, sign the petition. Or are you Chicken Little? You're afraid to go sideways with Pelosi. Put America first, put Israel first, put lives first. Born Alive is on the desk. Higgins won't sign it. Morelli won't sign it. The anti-BDS is on the desk. Higgins won't sign it. Morelli won't sign it. So let's bring that front and center. And so today with you, I think I'm delivering a message to Western New York. They won't read in the Buffalo News. And everything is factual, everything is honest, everything is direct. And I hope some folks have their eyes opened because of our interview, because we can take the time. You know, if I'm on a cable news station for 1.5 minutes, you can't get this out.
Right.
So this is a great opportunity.
I don't want this to be a commercial, you know, for Republicans or for you or whatever. I want this to be an honest discussion.
With the facts.
And in all honesty, I'll probably have Chris Jacobs on.
You should.
And I would welcome
now you have some
a
things
discussion.
to ask him.
You know, I mean, if you guys want to debate, I mean,
sure.
I'm all for open discussion. And
so am I.
Information is the best form of you know, assurance and insurance that the country can make the right decisions.
It's funny, I would ask both Nate McMurray, the Democrat, and Chris Jacobs, the Republican, why aren't they running against Higgins?
We're here.
Why aren't they running against Higgins?
Yeah, we're here for
They live in his district.
And anytime we will be
Well, I'll
more
come
than
back.
open.
You know me, I will be
Okay.
back anytime, and what I do is deliver the facts. I try to be armed with the facts and the data, and so it may support, you know, one party or the other, but it's not distorted, it's not fake news, it's very direct, it's very honest, and anyone that wants to check anything I said today will say he was right.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I'm getting a sign that we have to wrap up pretty soon. Last question, or one of the last questions anyway. You had it pretty good before you got into politics. You know, a successful businessman, you know, good family. A lot of people would say you had everything going and then you got into politics. What leads, same thing with Trump. I mean, he had, you know, pretty much everything successful. What leads somebody to get into politics, and is it what you expected?
Well, no one could expect where we are today, but I got in primarily when the county was bankrupt, and I love Western New York. I've been here since 1976, and the blizzard of '77 didn't chase me away. My success in the private sector has come while I've been in Western New York with a number of companies. And when they approached me and said the county needs someone to run it like a business, and my slogan, elect a chief executive, not a chief politician, I'm going to implement Lean Six Sigma. And we all know it worked. Huge surpluses when the rest of the state was suffering. The control board gone. We went from number 62 out of 62 to number 1, you know, with money in the bank and a very efficient government, which is still today, and even though Mark Poloncarz ended my Lean Six Sigma program, it was so successful, even he hasn't been able to totally muck it up. But it was to give something back. I was in a position to do it. You know, I answered the call of others saying, will you step forward? I did. The results speak for themselves in Erie County. I was driving on Eden Evans Center Road yesterday, going to an Eagle Scout Court of Honor. And that was the road I redid in an emergency where they couldn't even drive it in the winter. And I said to someone, it was about 11 years ago, I said, this road's still pretty darn good 11 years later. We paid cash for that road. But we all have a calling, and if you've had success, you could either play golf and you know, go live in Florida, or in my case, I said, I like a challenge. I like to work. I'm not somebody who wants to retire. And it was, and that's why, you know, I've remained in politics, and I'll look at what I've done with Trump since February of 16.
It's a different animal, though. I mean, things don't move quickly like they do sometimes in
no,
business.
you're right.
It's frustrating.
So it is very frustrating, but you do your best. Cub Scout motto, be prepared. The Boy Scout motto, I try to be with all the facts. And I can, you know, debate anyone any day of the week and defend where the country is, what Trump's done, and my accomplishments, putting the fake Buffalo news aside. And so, you know, I feel good when you go to bed at night. Did you do your best? And did you make an impact? And just the very people that Trump asked me to recommend, who have now been nominated, shows the impact that I've had on Western New York, even putting aside things like 21st century cures with more cancer research, or the tax bill that's got our economy rocking and rolling. You know, I'm working now on a bill for the immigration of illegal immigrants, working our dairy farms, which I think could get some traction if Pelosi would allow the Democrats to sign on. It is frustrating with a capital F.
And you put yourself out there for all kinds of attacks.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're in the public.
You got to have a thick skin.
Yeah, that's.
You got to have your family behind you, your friends behind you, and when you go to bed at night, say, did you do your best? I have always done that. Did you accomplish what you wanted? The answer is yes. Do you take a chance? Certainly when I endorsed Trump, everyone said it would be the end of my political career. He didn't have a chance. I did it because it was the right thing to do. So, no, I'm enjoying every day. I haven't worked this hard since I can't remember when. I'm being invited to more events in both DC and locally, and busy, busy, busy. Golf game doesn't exist anymore. But it's all good. It's, you know, America is at a critical juncture. We need to get Trump reelected. We need to go back where the Republicans accomplished more in the prior 2 years than ever, and now we're accomplishing nothing. We need to go back to pushing this economy, standing firm in the face of evil like North Korea, like Russia and Iran. We need to stand up for life, as in a baby born alive being murdered. They don't want to call it out for what it is. These are issues. that are critical to the future of our country and humanity. So, again, thank you for letting me come on and have this very
We'll
direct
have to do
discussion.
this again, because there's a lot to talk about.
I'll be on every week. Come on.
Okay, all right. Well, that's all the time we have for the big picture this week. I want to thank Congressman Chris Collins for being my guest. It's an interesting discussion. We'll have to do it again, hopefully. And thank you for watching the big picture. Thank you for watching, as always, WBBZ-TV. It's your TV station. We'll see you next time.